Live.
Hello and welcome, everyone. We apologize for being a couple minutes delayed here. We have a couple technical difficulties logging into the software program here, but we are now ready to go. Presentation is... My audio just cut out there, but my audio should be going fine for the rest of the presentation, provided that the technical side of this holds out. Welcome to the third installment of the Digital Key Talks with Dr. Douglas Graham. Welcome, Dr. Douglas Graham, best-selling author of the 80-10-10 Diet. Today is a talk on fitness. Can you give us a little primer on what we'll be covering today?
Sure, Kevin. Today I have a couple of interesting issues I want to discuss, and I'm imagining it's going to open doors to a whole lot of other topics. I think I could make a weeks-long presentation out of this whole subject matter, and so I'm breaking it down into parts. Today's part is primarily about the 6 facets of fitness, but I want to look at it with a slightly different, maybe from a slightly different angle than perhaps we usually look at the 6 facets, and partly because I think my audience is more advanced than they've ever been in the past, and so we can go through the basics a lot more quickly and then get on into a little bit more advanced perspective and advanced meaning of what's going on. What is it, what are the implications of this information? How can we use the information once it's presented? So I'm going to talk about what are the basic elements of fitness, and then once we're up to speed, there can be part 2, 3, 4, 5 on ad infinitum, perhaps. It's sort of like food. I never get tired of talking about food. I never get tired of talking about fitness. How fortunate it is that when I picked my email address years and years ago, I tried at least 10 or 12 different email addresses that were taken, and so I couldn't use them before I finally, just out of frustration, said, okay, food and sport. And that one stuck, and it's still me all these years later. And it's still appropriate. So, there's some things we just don't get tired. It's like work, right? You never get tired of watching other people work. So I don't get tired talking about fitness and sport and the different aspects involved. And today we're going to do just that.
I'm looking forward to hearing this presentation, Dr. Graham. So the style, everyone, will be Dr. Graham will deliver the presentation or lecture for 30 to 45 minutes, and then at the end, we'll welcome any and all questions. And throughout the presentation, feel free to type your question into the chat box. That way you don't have to try to remember it. Just get it right down into the chat box, and we'll take them in sequential order at the end of the lecture. So without further ado, Dr. Graham, would you like to present?
Well, sure. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you very much, folks. And as Kevin said, we did have a little bit of technical issues. We're going to put those behind us, but I got stuck for about 15 minutes. I had to change location, and then I had to reboot my computer, and then restart my computer, and then whatever the next kind of renew was called, and then turn off my, it was just endless. Here we are, but at 10 minutes of it, didn't look like it was ever going to happen, 10 minutes before the hour. And then at Kevin's end, he was having some technical issues after I finally got mine sorted. So I've always been interested in sport. I've always been interested in fitness. I had a great reunion this week with a young man. Well, when I knew him, he was a young man. I've known him since he was 8 years old. But we went to school together all the way through grammar school and high school. And he was always the best athlete in the school. When I played basketball by myself, I would always play against an imaginary partner. or an imaginary opponent, and he'd be the opponent I would use because he was the most talented. And I got to visit with him this week. Interestingly enough, after he went through college and pursued a career in professional baseball, which he ended up not making the pros, but got right there and then no. And I think that was just a matter of luck of the draw, because he certainly could have been a pro ball player. Anyway, he went back to school. Lo and behold, he became a chiropractor. So I got to visit with a friend of mine who's now been a chiropractor for the last 25 years. And we hadn't really talked since the last time I talked to him was 1971. But his love of sport is still there. He's kept himself super fit, and I was really glad to see that. I tell you all that as a preamble, because also when I was in high school, and even younger, there was a man who ran past my house every day. Now, back in the 60s, running really was not a particularly popular sport. You probably can't remember back that far, most of you, but those of you who can, running was not a particularly popular sport. It didn't truly become popular until a book called Aerobics came out. A man by the name of Frank Cooper, I believe, wrote the initial book Aerobics, and then the new Aerobics, I think, and possibly even a third aerobics book. But that was all in the 70s. And this man was well respected. Dr. George Sheehan was his name. He was a noted cardiologist in our area, and he's written many books on running and on the mental aspects of being a long distance runner. He ran every day. And because I lived in a small town, he very often ran past my house, at least in one direction, if not often in both. So he ended up writing for running magazines, and I don't want to quote which one, whether it was Runner's World or Runner or Runner's Inc. or whatever, but he wrote for, I think for Runner magazine, and he had a standing column with Dr. George Sheehan, and I used to read it avidly every month because A, he was a local guy, and B, I was interested in the sport. But he wrote an article about fitness that really caught my attention. I'd finished my undergraduate in physical education by that time, and he wrote an article about fitness, and he said, really, when it comes down to fitness, all you need to do is lift and jog. I mean, and this was basically his take on it. So it looked something like this. This was George Sheehan back in the day, and he says the basic protocol for fitness is lift and jog. That was it. It seemed so straightforward, especially when he coupled that with his perception on competition, which was that competition gave meaning to your training and gave you some kind of a reason for setting the goals and a purpose behind doing what you were doing. And I was always impressed with that. Although it seemed to me there was more to fitness than just lift and jog, I had to admit that he was covering a whole lot of bases and making it so very simple. While at the same time, what I wanted to do is get a little bit more into what was training and what made it work and what made it tick. And so I started talking about something called the training effect. And you can read it. I mean, training effect happens when we put appropriate overload with sufficient recovery. And what happens is we get better at doing what we're doing, which is our goal, right? We want to get better at doing whatever it is we're doing. And so we apply the training effect by using overload. And I say appropriate overload because, for somebody who's super, super strong, they're going to probably lift up a lot more weight in order to get an overload than somebody who's very, very weak and can barely lift any weight, but can still overload by lifting something that might not even be heavy enough as a warm-up for the super strong person. So it's got to be appropriate to the individual. And then what happens is the training effect. We get better. Our body gives us that which we ask of it. It develops and grows in the directions that we ask. If you use your hands a lot for rough stuff, you get stronger hands, you get calluses on your hands. If you're on your feet a lot, if you're up on your toes, you're getting the balance required. If you're, whatever it is that you're doing, you get better at what you do. And in a very specific way, sports specific or training specific way, it really doesn't happen with a lot of other activities. Although there is some crossover. Really, if you want to get better at running, the best way to do it is by running. And if you want to get better at lifting something heavy, well, the best way to do it is to lift heavy things. But we want to apply our appropriate overload within those specifications of what it is we're trying to get better at. And this is what makes training for sport in many ways interesting, is this opportunity to really get specific in our application of overload in order to bring about the training effect. Now, I keep talking about a couple of words that really we don't need to throw about without defining them. For instance, we use two words here. We talk about overload and recovery. So in order for there to be overload and recovery, and for that to mean something to you, I want it to mean as much to you as it does to me. And for that reason, we'll start with just a few definitions to make sure that we're all thinking about the same thing when I say certain words, because I don't want to say a certain word and then you think something completely different than what I think, and then we're off talking in two different directions. So when I talk about recovery, I'm talking about all aspects of recovery. Now, recovery could be as simple as catching your breath after you run a few, 100 meters or something. Or recovery could be recovering from a broken leg. Recovery could be the recovery that happens overnight after you've trained hard one day, and then you recover overnight through eating properly and sleeping and resting sufficiently so that you're ready again the next day. We actually mean the exact same things that a doctor means when a person is in the intensive care unit and they start talking about recovery from illness or recovery from surgery. What we're looking for is for the basic parameters, the signs and symptoms that we use to measure how a person is doing. Often, the most common four are the vital signs are pulse and respiration, temperature, and blood pressure. We want to see those return to normal. It's common for runners, for instance, to check their pulse every morning before they get out of bed, because if your pulse is 52, 52, 52, it's just always 52 every morning you wake up. And then you increase your training routine while at the same time you had to do a little bit extra stuff during your day. So you worked harder and you got an hour's less sleep. And then you wake up in the morning, the next morning, and it's 55. And the next morning, and it's 58. And you realize you haven't fully recovered from yesterday, and it's already today. And if you don't fully recover, you're losing ground. And this has got to add up in an adverse way. Essentially, what starts to happen is we get the reverse of the training effect. We get the anti-training effect. We start losing ground rather than gaining ground. And so we want to recover fully to the point where we are no longer making the adaptations that were part of the training effect, right? And the body has now attained its new level of performance ability. Now, I say that even though it's not exactly true, because some of the performance gain is going to happen, is not going to become apparent until the next time you train. When you then train again and you see the effect, more things happen mentally so that you continue to improve as you assess that you are able to do more, and then your whole physiology changes, and with it, some more of your anatomy, so that further training effect can happen and you can continue to improve. It's a rather neat little spiral that's spiraling up if you allow sufficient recovery, and spiraling down if you supply insufficient recovery. And so we have to keep an eye on that. While at the same time we used another word, we used the word overload. And I want to actually look at a couple of words here as we go through this. So if we come back to a slide, what we'll see is that we can look at our idea of overload as being one thing, a phrase we might use, whereas overtraining is a separate concept, and then overworking is yet another one. So what is overload? An overload is going to be, again, unique to the individual. It's going to be a bit of a push. It's going to be a challenge. But it's going to be a challenge that you can handle. You want it to be a challenge that's within your capacity. I would call it a reasonable challenge, as opposed to an unreasonable challenge. We want it to be a reasonable challenge, something that, when coupled with recovery, results in the training effect, as we mentioned, as opposed to something like overwork or overtraining, which are two different things. When we overtrain, which is something we've talked about before, everybody's thrown the word around, but we don't always mean the same thing. Overtraining is simply it's beyond your ability to recover. You're training past it. You still try to recover in the same amount of time as always, and you just can't make it, okay? And you start to have a negative training effect. Your running speeds, you start running slower. You start lifting less. You start feeling more tight instead of more flexible, or whatever the things are that you are gauging as your markers to tell you, am I improving in my sport? All of a sudden you start going, wow, I've been pushing harder. How come I'm not doing better? Well, there's a good chance you're overtraining, and you can overtrain to the point where training just stops being fun, where you just don't even want to go out and do it. You can require a lot more sleep. You just find you just can't keep up. If you're not improving on a regular basis, there's a good chance you're overtraining. If you want to, you could look at it as under recovering and say, well, gee, what I just need to do is recover more. Well, yeah, in 24 hours, there's only so much you can recover. So you could allow more recovery time. You could give yourself more sleep time. I know a lot of athletes have found that if they just allow themselves to sleep more, sleep 9 or 10 hours rather than 7 or 8, that they actually can train much more aggressively. Not everybody always has that luxury. I know athletes that train 11 and 12 hours. I'm sorry, that sleep 11 and 12 hours. And they find that they're pretty much unstoppable, and they would never consider going back to sleeping a mere 8 or 9 hours per night. Some of those guys are not professional athletes. They are just incredibly dedicated amateurs. And each of us is going to pick and choose, but we have to give ourselves enough. You might have to either curtail some of your training in order to recover better. You might have to be more specific in your training so as to really focus in on reaching your goals without getting all caught up in lots of extraneous training that takes you away from your goals. Or you may just have to recover more. But if you train beyond your ability to recover, you get a negative training effect. We think of this as overtraining. We can also go into something we call overwork. Now, overwork, instead of being the reasonable challenge of overload, is a bigger challenge, and it will typically result in injury. So you can jump off the bottom rung of a ladder and land on the ground, and that's not much load. But it's more than what you have when you're just standing on the ground. You can climb up to the second rung of a ladder and jump off, and you can tell there's something to absorb when you land on the ground. You climb up to the third rung of a ladder, you're 3 or 4 feet in the air now, and you jump off and land on the ground, and you have to absorb a fair amount of shock. That may be overload. Some of you might have to jump off the 4th rung or the 5th rung. But if you climb up to the 8th or the 9th rung of a ladder and then just jump off to the ground, most of us, with the exception of a few super well-trained athletes who know how to absorb that kind of a landing, most of us are going to get hurt when we hit the ground. You jump off the 9th rung of a ladder from 8 feet in the air or whatever that is, you're going to get hurt. And that would be an unreasonable challenge. You would be overworking your muscles, joints, bones, with connective tissue, whatever it was you were overworking. Maybe you're overworking your reflex abilities or your coordination to absorb the shock. But there would be an overwork, and most likely there would be an injury. And injuries are not only your worst enemies, but they're your biggest setbacks. You really don't want to ever overwork. So we want to focus in on overload because it results in a training effect. We don't want to get into overload to the point of it being overtraining or overwork, because both of those are going to have negative effects for us, some of them that can be very long lasting. You can have lifetime injuries as a result of overwork, and something that and then you say, oh, well, I hurt my shoulder and now I just can't throw, and I'm not going to be able to throw for the rest of my life. Well, you have to live with it at that point, and we're not looking to have any more of those accrue than absolutely have to accrue. We want to experience as few injuries as possible. So let's look a little bit more at what we're talking about, because there are different types of muscle that do different things. Our bodies can be trained in different ways. And here we see Mo Farrell and his training partner, Mr. Rupp. I don't know Mr. Rupp's first name, sorry. And these guys are fantastic runners. Mo Farrell won the 5,000 meter and the 10,000 meter in the 2012 Olympics in London. It was a great day for Great Britain. And as you can see, not only does he have fantastic legs, but they're not particularly big legs. He uses type 1 muscle fibers. These fibers respond to light loads. They're the muscles that you use in order to write or to type. They're the ones you use to eat with. They're the ones you use to move around and make dinner. They're the ones that you use most of the time. These are what you use for most of your running activities and for most endurance type activities. They don't tend to get bigger, or hypertrophy is the word we use for muscle growth. They don't tend to hypertrophy. No matter how we train those type 1 fibers, they don't tend to get bigger. And they recover fairly quickly too, which is another great feature. And so we'll often see that people who run go out and run every day or practically every day. And that's a big deal, as compared to the type 2 muscle fibers that only respond when the loads get heavy. So when you bend your arm and you use your biceps, and if you do that even like right here now, and you just bend your arm and you feel your biceps contract a little bit, that was all type 1 fibers, until the load gets heavy enough so that it's at least half or more of the most you could possibly pick up, we don't get into type 2 fibers. Now, when the type 2 fibers are firing, type 1 fibers typically are not. And this, again, is an interesting point because you think you're using all your muscle to do something, and you're really not. You're just using all your muscle of any specific type that you might have, and even then you don't usually use all of them every time. But the type 2 fibers only respond to heavy loads, greater than half of your 1 rep maximum, and these are the fibers that tend to get bigger. And they get bigger as a result of what I call time under load. We just call it TUL. So the more time you put under the load, the bigger the muscles get, which brings up an interesting concept. And it's an interesting concept because it's a confusion factor. Now, usually when I'm talking about food, we talk about the confusion factor that so many people live with, the contradiction between what they know and what they do. They know that, for instance, in blood work and lab work, we're looking to fall in the middle of the mid-range. That's a really ideal spot to be. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. Too much or too little implies a problem. And yet, with muscle, we always, and still at the end of that whole food thing, when you ask people what's the best source of this, that, or the other, they always tell you what's the highest source of this, that, or the other. And they equate the highest with the best, even though we know that that's not it. What we wanted was the mid-range. While at the same time, here with muscles, we equate big and strong. Those two words are used together, big and strong. They're used together all the time. And yet we know that the biggest men are typically not the strongest men. If you've ever watched strongman competitions or weightlifting competitions or powerlifting competitions, we don't see the great big huge bodybuilders in those competitions at all. Those great big guys are huge, but they're not as strong as the strongest men. While at the same time, when we do look at the strongest men over and over and over again, whether it's men or women, but I mean, when we look at the strongman competitions, the bodybuilders, the power lifters, on through the different weightlifting categories, all through that stuff, and I know I said bodybuilders too, I'm sorry, all through those various strength things, we never see anybody in those competitions that look like bodybuilders. And so if we look at the two types of people involved, what we see is we see really strong guys. Okay, I admit that they're working with weights. You know, it's what they do. They work with weights, and so they are going to be muscled, but they're not the massive guys that we see in bodybuilding competitions. Sure, they work with weights, and so they are going to be, you know, you're going to see that they have muscles. We expect them to show some, but I mean, these are guys that are lifting triple their weight, and some of them even quadruple their weight. I mean, this is a magnificent amount of strength. When you consider that most people doing the lift that we see here would have a hard time lifting much more than their own weight, these guys are pulling up triple, and some of them, as I say, even quadruple their own weight. But they're doing it in a way that helps them develop strength, because what they want is more strength, not more size. They want to spend as little time under load as possible. This is an important issue. And so typically when they do one repetition, it might last 2 or 3 seconds for one repetition. If they're doing a set of 3 or 4 or 5, the whole thing might include 10 or 15 seconds under load, and that's it. A rather short time under load, as opposed to bodybuilders, where the bodybuilders are going to, I mean, these are men who are 6 feet tall and more than 300 pounds, without much more than a pound of fat on them in total. I mean, they're incredibly ripped, as the expression goes. But they'll be the first to tell you that they're not particularly strong. Now, compared to you and me, they're strong because they work with weights as part of their training, and they've done so for 10, 15, 20 years. These guys have spent a lot of time in the gym lifting weights, but they haven't been lifting for maximum strength. They've been lifting for maximum hypertrophy. And so they put more time under load. They'll often do sets of 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 repetitions at a time. And so their sets are often 60 to 90 seconds, or sometimes even a little bit more, meaning that they're putting in 5 to 10 and 20 times as much time under load in order to generate that muscularity, that hypertrophy, while they're not particularly trying to generate strength. Strength is an outcome that comes with using the weights, but they're not using the maximally heavy weights. As we said, if you want to get better at running, you run. If you want to get better at maximum heavy weights, you lift the heaviest things you can. If you want to get better at hypertrophy, you put in more time under load, sufficient load to engage the type 2 fibers that will hypertrophy. And so where a runner might run for an hour or two, a lot of time under load, the load is going onto the type 1 fibers. They're not going to hypertrophy. Even with all that load, they don't get bigger. So it's an interesting factor, which brings us back to Dr. Sheehan with a little more understanding. And we'll see if, and we'll see not only if, we'll see how many times over the coming day and weeks and months you still continue to struggle as you equate bigger and stronger. Because the two, as we say, we know they don't equate. We've seen that they don't equate. We've all experienced that they don't equate. And yet, somehow in our head, we still put the two together. So, for most of us, we all move. We want to create more ground force. And we want to create that ground force for a specific reason. That reason being that if we run, or if we jump, we want to run faster, we want to jump higher. In order to run faster or jump higher, what we have to be able to do is push the ground with more force. The technical term for that is ground force. Yippee. We want to be able to generate more ground force. This has meaning for all of us. And in order to generate more ground force, yes, you have to learn your technique. Of course, you have to learn your technique. In order to get good at generating ground force as a high jumper, it's a specific technique involved. In order to generate ground force as a pole vaulter, it's a specific technique involved. In order to generate ground force as a sprinter or a hurdler or whatever it is that we're doing, you've got to know your technique. But by increasing strength, we can then generate more ground force. So we find really that there's lots of ways to improve performance. And this is going to come about partly by increasing our strength in order to generate more ground force. Before I learned about the different systems that exist in terms of measuring your fitness, I started coming up with my own way of doing it before I knew that it was such a problem to actually measure fitness. Turns out that fitness is rather tough to measure because there's so many different parts to it. And I started looking at, instead of just lift and jog, I started looking at speed, strength, and endurance and thinking of it as a triangle where some activities were mostly about speed, right? The 40-yard dash and the 100-meter run, this was incredible speed. Whereas the marathon or the double marathon, these are, you know, the 10-mile swim, these were feats of tremendous endurance. And we could look at that as a different thing than, once again, the weightlifters who are going for 1 rep, maximum strength, show of force, let's get it done. But the thing is that there actually is speed involved in a good strength lift. They don't tend to want to do it slowly. They want to do it as quickly as possible, have it over within seconds. Speed is certainly connected to strength, and so is endurance, because if you run out of endurance before the lift is over, or you run out of strength before the endurance run is over, you can see really that all of them are somewhat related and hooked up to each other. In fact, not only are they hooked up to each other, but we can combine them. And if we combine one with the next, look at what's in between, what we see really is that in between we'll have various various capacities again, various abilities. If we go back and look, and I'm going to look at this and say, I have to apologize because I'm not sure that we've made all of the technical changes that were supposed to be made in our graphics. But if we combine speed and strength, what we're going to see is speed and strength combines to make power, which should be on the left side of this screen. If we combine, as it is now, okay, so if we combine speed and strength, we end up with power. But if we combine speed with endurance, the kind of thing we'd need for a 10K run, then we have something that has a neurologic component. You have to keep yourself remembering to run as fast as you can and forcing the fibers to react as quickly as possible. This is neurological, while the muscles have to do the work. They call this neuromyability because in the world of sport, they had no other word. I had to make up a word. I apologize for that. Neuromyability is a huge mouthful. When you listen to the next track and field meet that you watch or attend, you'll hear that the announcers talk about it, and they'll call it speed endurance, which I think is a cop-out because we don't call it speed strength. We call it power. I don't think we should call it speed endurance either. But neuromyability is too much of a mouthful, so I'm going to encourage you to say NMA, just like the letters you see in parentheses. We'll call it NMA. And this is the combination of speed and endurance, the really fast 10K run, the really fast marathon run. The guys who are setting records, gals who are setting records in these type of activities have phenomenal NMA. And of course, if we look at the combination of strength with endurance, it's not can you climb the mountain, but can you climb the mountain with a backpack as heavy as yourself on your back? Do you have the strength along with the endurance? Then we're talking about a myocapacity, something that I would call, let's see if I can bring it on screen for you. I'll shorten it down to myocap if you prefer, whether you want to say myocapacity or myocap, but you want to know what we're talking about. It's strength and endurance combined. Now, for me, the interesting thing was how these various factors interact. Not just that they are connected, but that they do interact. So if we wanted, for instance, to become a power athlete, we might practice power, but we also might want to improve our strength in order to be able to demonstrate more power. And we'd also want to improve our speed in order to demonstrate more power. That seems pretty straightforward, but what if you wanted to improve your speed? Well, you can practice your speed, and that helps. But if you improve your power, you'll show more speed. And if you improve your NMA, you'll show more speed. If you want to improve your endurance, we have to improve our NMA and our myocap. Each of them are connected, and around the entire star, we'll see that we can even make a case for improving power by improving endurance a little, improving NMA and myocap a bit more, while we work on our speed and strength primarily in order to be able to generate more power. And you can go around that star in any direction to any point. If you want to get better at your strength, there's no way to ignore both power and myocap. And if you want to improve the power, you've got to improve the speed. If you want to improve the myocap, you've got to improve the endurance. To get both of those or either of those, NMA is going to be part of it. Granted, NMA is the smallest part of strength training, but it is a part. And you can see by using these 6 where you put your emphasis personally so that you know what kind of development you're going to get, or where you need to put your emphasis in order to get the kind of development that you want to get. So here I'm showing you the relationship of one to the other and how they work and interwork as described a moment ago. And you can see it, that one leads to the other and each leads to the next. In truth, there is more to training than just those 6, because we have what I refer to as the abilities. This is not a complete list, but this shows many of the abilities. We have things like agility. I'm not going to describe each of these, and you can add to your list, or if you think of any that you'd like to see on this list, please feel free to write it in the chat box, and we can improve this slide to end up with even more abilities that are part of training but aren't part of your speed, strength, endurance triangle. We use these abilities in order to apply overload. We use these abilities in order to round out our training, in order to mimic the situations that we might see in competition, and in order to develop any and all of the weak links that exist in our own training program. So you might be really, really good at speed, strength, and endurance, but weak in flexibility, and having a bit more flexibility could work to your advantage. Or you're really good at shooting a ball, but you're not particularly agile on the court, or you don't have good vision, court awareness, a court sense. Maybe your balance isn't good. Everything else is good except your balance. And if you had better balance, you'd be able to create more focus on your ground force, so that when you push off to do your high jump, you actually push in the right direction. I don't know what it'll be for you. But we want to look at all of these things so as not to have a weak link in the overall training factor. What we end up with is 3 considerations. That if we improve our strength, we'll improve our performance. As we improve our technique, we'll improve our performance. And we got to stay on top of the mental attitude, because self-talk matters as much as anything else. If you're overtraining to the point of poor mental attitude, you need to cut back the training. It'll still improve your performance, or increase your recovery to improve your performance. These are the factors in a big conceptual way. This is what's involved in metering out optimum improvements in performance. Sure, we have to work on our technique. It's huge. But without increases in strength, or without increases in mental attitude, we're limiting ourselves greatly. We don't want to be stuck behind any more than absolutely necessary. I want to give a little bit more, and then take some questions. I want to just mention our FitX Health Week. We think of this a lot of times as Health and Fitness Week. A lot of people call it Sports Camp. It's been been recognized by a lot of different names. It's even been called the Jungle Challenge at one point. We think FitX will reach out to a lot of people. I just want to let you know, I think of this as my best week of the year, every year, as it has been for the last 20 years. This is my best week of the year. I have the most fun. I have the most challenge. I eat the best food. I'm with the best people. I don't know how to give enough hyperbole and enough hype to this whole week, but if you're looking for the best that will take you past your blocks, give you quantum leaps in performance, show you how other people do it who have already figured it out so that you don't have to make mistakes. You can just learn the right way right from the get-go. We can show you a couple of, well, at least 18 different warm-up techniques and as many cool-down programs, show you probably 50 to 60 different fitness routines to go through, that all you really need is one, but if you have 50 or 60 to choose from, you can pick and choose as you see fit after that in order to develop your fitness and your physique into the person you wish to become. I mean, that's what it's going to boil down to, is you're going to become the person you want to become, both in physique, fitness, mental attitude, and the rest, by training appropriately. So for me, FitX Health Week, Health and Fitness Week, to me, this is the highlight of it all. There is no more supportive community you could be involved in. The food is 100% organic. Of course, our own 80-10-10 Culinary Skills Week trained chefs will be making all your food. All the training is customized to meet your individual ability levels. Your questions are answered. There's nutrition and fitness lectures that I give every day. I don't know a place with more plush accommodations. Most people will have a roommate. Some may not have one. But we usually do everything in the shared room accommodations just to promote more social time. To me, Health and Fitness Week, we're in-house, our FitX Health Week is the highlight of the year, and it's one that I strongly urge you to attend. If after 1 week you could have the powerful physical, emotional, and spiritual changes that would take you for a lifetime of success in all venues, I mean, what would such a week be worth to you? I mean, to me, it's worth a lot to be my best. I'm willing to pay quite a price to be my best. The lovely thing about our FitX Week is that it's at the lowest price that it's been in over a decade. We're offering the spectacular deals on our FitX program for this year. I urge you to please take a look at that. Consider the speed, strength, endurance triangle. Consider using all of those various abilities as ways of improving and increasing the overload without making the actual activities damaging or dangerous or anything else. And at that point, I'd like to say, it's a ton of fun for me to be able to talk about such issues. I enjoy it immensely. I could I could talk about it for a long time, I think, and have just as much fun as I had in just a short time. There's a lot to cover, a lot of detail, of course, and in every one of those aspects we can go into greater detail. But I'd like to know at this point if people have any questions whatsoever, if there's any way we can help you, if there's more that I can offer. I'm sure Kevin probably has a question or two. I certainly am open to whatever questions you might have.
Yes, Dr. Graham, we do have some questions submitted here, and I'll just go in sequential order from when they were submitted. The first one came in, and it was a question about your opinion on the basics to stay fit. You said Dr. George Sheehan had said that jogging and lifting just about covers it. In your opinion, Dr. Graham, what are the basics? What do we need to do to cover the aspect or the element of fitness in our health program?
Well, typically when I evaluate someone's fitness, I'm going to look at 5 areas as opposed to the 6 facets of fitness, and not to confuse you in that way, because even as we say, the 6 facets is not comprehensive. There's all those abilities on the side. It's not the most streamlined, but what it's beautiful at doing is representing the interrelationships of one aspect of fitness with the next. Whereas another way of looking at it is called 5 facets of fitness. Now, the 5 facets of fitness is more streamlined. It includes everything one would think, but it really doesn't. It includes everything because this is muscular strength, muscular endurance, cardio, flexibility, and all the neurologic skills. Now, when we think of all the neurologic skills like proprioception and kinesthetic awareness and balance and coordination and things of this sort, most people don't include mental attitude. If you're willing to include mental attitude, if you're willing to include intellect or intelligence, maybe those are 2 different things. If you're willing to include experience and the way you apply that experience, your learning, your court sense, your court vision, your visual memory, if we want to include all of those things in our neurological, well, perhaps it's all inclusive, but I think for a lot of people, when the challenges get big, people tend to either rise to the occasion or fall in face of the occasion. And falling in face of the occasion isn't something we really want to have happen. We want to rise to meet the occasion. And, it's 2 outs, bases loaded, bottom of the 9th, and you're at bat. Do you strike out or do you hit a home run? What is your mind telling you you're going to do? Does your mind tell you, well, I'm going to fail here? And then when you do, you go, you see, I knew. Or does your mind say, I can beat this guy. I'm going to hit a home run right now. I'm going to take his best pitch and I'm going to knock it out of the park. And then you go do that. This is really, really tough in sports like tennis or boxing or golf, where they're called cutthroat activities, and there's a winner and there's a loser, and both winners want to win. Even when both winners want to win, who's going to prevail? It's very often not the most talented guy, but the guy who wants it the most. And we don't have a lot of objective methods for evaluating such mental attitude, mental toughness. Grant ran a run recently that was set up as a 140-mile run, and at the 70-mile point, or almost 75-mile point, he had run from the lowest area on the course to the highest area on the course. And essentially, it was going to get easier from that point onward, and the last 15 or 20 miles was just a long, gentle, sloping, and it was going to be really nice. He knew that, but it was about 34 degrees at the top. He was still in shorts and t-shirt. His gear was a few miles away. He'd been moving along for the last 4 or 5 hours at about 1 mile per hour because it was so steep and he was so tired. He wanted to take a nap. The weather was turning bad. It was all the wrong things were happening. And when he spoke to some people on his team, who probably at that point should have been saying, "Come on, Grant! Now it's you've reached the halfway, and it's all downhill from here, and it's going to get easy, and let's go, Grant." They'd never seen anybody push this hard in their life. You see people pushing this far, and they didn't. I'm not blaming Okay, Grant stopped, and he chose to stop. He felt he had done what he needed to do on that. I don't know, that was almost 24 hours of running at that point. But he'd done what he needed to do. And he wasn't fully aware of the rules that if he even what he did is he sat down in a car in order to get warm. And then when the race officials saw him sitting in the car, they said, okay, you're done. If you sit in the car, the race is over for you. And he didn't even know that, I don't think. But if you talk to Grant about that run, he'll tell you that he was still in great spirits at the end of 70 miles running, and 70 miles of running can break a lot of people. This was a very, very difficult 70 miles. And so, you see the true heart of a champion, really one really tough guy. I mean, I worked with a guy named Kenny Crows who was trying to swim what's called the impossible swim. There's a channel in between Aruba and Venezuela. It's only 19 miles. Well, it's 19 miles in a straight line, but it's impossible to swim in a straight line. First of all, because there's huge waves, and second of all, because there's currents, all uncharted, unpredictable currents running through that area. And Kenny was swimming, and as he swam, he could see Venezuela off in the distance, but it was getting further and further away because the more he swam, he was being driven to the north while he was trying to swim to the west, and north was parallel to the coast. In fact, the coastline actually was fading away from him because the coastline was falling off to the west. So he's swimming west, and the coastline's getting further and further away the more he swam. And finally, after 22 hours, he was actually further away from the coast than he was at 16 hours. And back then, they really didn't like to leave anybody in the water more than 24 hours, and he was more than 2 hours away from the coast. It just seemed like he was just never going to get there. It didn't matter what he did; he was losing ground. He came out of the water, and rather than say, "Okay, I've been defeated by this impossible swim. Nobody's ever done it, and I didn't either," he came to me and said, "Look, I want to swim the impossible swim." We changed his training a little bit. We changed his nutrition quite a bit. He went back and swam that same swim in 11 hours. I mean, truly heart of the champion. And so much so that he then said, I feel fine. I'm ready to go. He got in an ocean-going kayak and kayaked back to Aruba in another 7 hours, so that his whole trip took him 18 hours from start to finish. And got back just after dark, left in the early morning dawn, got back just after dark, and put in an 18-hour performance that still he's the only person in history to swim that swim. But the heart of the champion, and it's an unmeasurable thing. So fitness becomes something that's very difficult to measure. In fact, I didn't define, for all the definitions I did at the beginning, I didn't define fitness because I'm not so certain that it can be truly. There's different kinds of fitness. Each type of fitness can be measured and monitored and evaluated, objectified. But overall fitness, you can just sort of say it's all of those things. But there seems to always be those factors. I'm always reminded of the time Dennis Rodman threw a basketball at the back of the person who was guarding him because he was about to inbound the ball. There was, I think, 3 or 4 seconds left in the game. There wasn't much left in the game. And he was asked to inbound the ball. And in order to make things a little more difficult for him, the person guarding him turned his back on him so that he could see what the other players were doing and where he was most needed. Well, when he turned his back, Dennis Rodman threw the ball off the opponent's back, which makes it legal for Dennis to then touch the ball. So he stepped on court, grabbed the ball, threw a layup, basically, and that won the game. So that kind of awareness, that applied intelligence, that experience, the knowledge of the rules being part of fitness at that point, I would have a hard time answering the question. I think you more have to ask, what do you want to be fit for? And then how to get fit for that, rather than, because even in the world of fitness and the professionals all around the world who teach and objectify fitness, no one's come up with an agreed upon or universally agreed upon definition for fitness. So it's a great question, but I don't have an answer either.
Can't answer. All right. Well, then we'll move on to the next question coming in from David, who says he's been on the 8-10-10 diet since last February 2nd, and his swimming speed has decreased about 5%. He lost about 25 pounds in the first 3 months and have stayed about a stable weight since then. He notices he breathes easier while training, but his energy and strength levels seem a little bit lower. Do you have any insight as to that? I know it's a very personal question, but perhaps something...
If I'm understanding correctly, not swimming as fast as he was. Is that what you're saying, do you think?
Yes. He said, I believe he said he decreased by 5%, but I'm assuming he means that...
Yeah, it's taken longer.
Yes.
Sometimes it's hard to tell with speed decrease. But okay. So he doesn't mean his times have decreased by 5%. His overall speed is decreased, and there's various reasons for that. I mean, typically, pound for pound, bigger means stronger relative to external objects. In this case, the external object being the water. You're moving something that weighs in water about the same as it weighed when you weighed more. And pound for pound, you're not as strong as you were. I mean, if you drop 20 pounds, 25 pounds, I mean, pretty much any bodybuilder will tell you, any power lifter, any Olympic weightlifter will say, oh, you know, if you drop 20, 25 pounds, you're going to lose strength in specific ways. You can usually tell what those ways are. And part of that is quite understandable because, you know, I mean, if you weigh 25 pounds more every time you stand up, you're lifting an extra 25 pounds. You stand up a lot of times per day. You go up and down stairs a lot of times per day. You move your arms and pick up things, and they don't weigh as much. And so the shoulders don't get the same load. Losing weight can affect your strength. I don't know what you're going through health-wise specifically, and as you say, you've seen some positive changes in that regard, but I can assure you that your body is still going through a lot of physiologic changes that can easily take 2 to 3 years before you see the turnarounds in everything that you want to see, rather than just seeing a few things turn around. Breathing gets better fairly quickly because red blood cells only live about 90 days, 90 to 100 days roughly. And by the second half of their life expectancy, they're not functioning as well as brand new blood cells do. So typically people will notice improvements when they go on 80-10-10. In terms of breathing, they'll notice improvements in 15, 20 days. They'll see huge improvements because your oxygen carrying capacity is already improved dramatically in such a short time, and enough so that you notice it. Rest things like strength can take a bit longer, but it may be the way you're training as well. And I have no idea, you know, to get stronger, muscles require specific training without going into overtraining. So I can't, it's a little difficult to comment exactly. If you've lost a lot of body fat and you're less buoyant in the water than you were, this can also make swimming a little bit more challenging. Typically, swimmers don't want to be incredibly low body fat. Unlike, they don't look like Mo Farah. You know, they want to carry enough body fat so as to remain a little bit buoyant, because it's just easier to swim forward when you weigh less in the water. And so there could be various factors at play here, and I don't know what all of them are without really looking at your health situation specifically, but I can think of at least some, and I don't know if any of those things apply. Certainly doing the requisite strength training that helps swimmers swim. The shoulder work specifically, and the leg work. I mean, fast swimmers certainly use their legs a lot. Endurance swimmers, it's 90% of the forward motion is coming from the arms. But when you're swimming for some speed, and you don't mention what kind of swimming you're talking about, if it's sprints or if it's a little bit longer distance, then legs certainly play a much bigger role in the shorter swims. I don't know if that helps or not. Let me know if it helps, then we can do more as needed.
Thank you for addressing it, Dr. Graham. And perhaps even this conversation could carry over or spill over into the forum, David.
Absolutely.
801010forum.com. The next question comes in from Tom, who was asking, do you recommend working out every day for, say, around 30 to 60 minutes? And if you're feeling low energy and tired, do you recommend then just taking a day off? Or do you still try to push yourself even when you're still feeling tired? And just a note, Tom's a tennis player.
Well, I think I certainly like to move every day. And there are types of training that you can do every day, and then there's types of training that you're going to find you can't do every day. So where a tennis player wants to strengthen specific parts of the body in order to improve the power of the stroke, and we know this starts down in the legs, so I mean, we're looking at deadlifts and squats, we're looking at triceps extensions and biceps curls, we're looking at a bit of overhead press, some shoulder work, perhaps some bench work, as well as including all the core you possibly can, because you got to be able to open up the hips on every stroke, right? The hips go, and then the arm comes, and the racket comes last. So the specific strength work, you could do strength training every day, but not for the same muscle group every day. There's just no way you're going to be able to recover quickly enough with heavy strength work on the big muscle groups. I mean, I'm training my legs for as heavy as I can, just twice a week. I can sometimes do 3 times a week, but if I do 3 times a week every week, I start losing ground rather than gaining ground. That's not my goal. I want to gain ground. So I'm sticking with twice a week on my legs. I'm not going more than twice a week on my arms for triceps and related areas that have to do with pushing for bench press, because more than twice a week, then I start losing ground. It's fun to train it every day, but I can't do it for strength, and I can't do it effectively because I just can't recover that quickly. As far as cardio, you could do cardio every day, but again, depends on how hard and how long. If you're going for all out, probably no. You can certainly play tennis every day, but if you're going to play for all you're worth, you probably find that you're only really good every other day, every third day. Otherwise, mentally, your body starts saying, whoa, your brain starts feeling, hey, I can't keep up this intensity. It's not so much fun anymore. So studies were done on snow skiers that I think are relevant here. When I was a kid, snow skiers just skied during the wintertime. That was it. And during the rest of the year, they did what they wanted to do. Sometimes they trained, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they do things that were related, sometimes they didn't. And the coaches and the sports physiologists and whatnot found that instead of skiing 90 days a year, if we could get skiers skiing 180 days a year, that they actually became much better skiers. And they carried that concept through a bit more and said, well, what happens if they ski 270 days a year? And they became much better skiers, 3 days out of 4, which meant that they had to sometimes go to South America, or they had to go to Australia, or at least New Zealand, where there is some skiing. They had to go somewhere. They had to go to the mountains of North America and ski in the, in the Arctic or something in the summer. So they finally said, well, gee, what would happen if we just ski every day? And what they found is when they started skiing every day, the performance tailed off. It was not better than when people were skiing 330, 340 days a year. Somewhere around 340 seemed to be a threshold where people stopped, and not only stopped improving, they actually started skiing worse. They started making more mistakes. They started losing power. They started losing accuracy. They definitely lost enthusiasm. They didn't want to do it anymore. They lose their edge. They lose their focus. I mean, all the wrong things were happening. They started losing skiers. And basically what happened was they're saying, look, it's just not so much fun if we have to do this. If we have to do this every day. It's a treat to ski. We love to ski. We want to ski. We enjoy skiing. We like skiing 3 days out of every 4. We like skiing 30 days out of 40. We like skiing 300 days out of 400. But not every day of the year. There needs to be that break when we do something else. We don't mind doing something even every day, but it needs to be something else. And so, if you had to play tennis every single day, it would stop being as much fun as if you got to play tennis 5 or 6 days out of every week. That would be, so there's a lot of aspects to the answer to that question. Yes, you can train every day, but you can't train in the same way about the same thing and same body part, and certainly not every day, because eventually, it's like, can you eat the same food? Well, even if you could eat the same food nutritionally, if you could just live on lettuce and bananas, maybe you could. I'm not saying, and I don't want to do the experiment or even find out, but let's say you could live on lettuce and bananas indefinitely. I wouldn't want to. It's not so much that I tire of lettuce or tire of bananas any more than a cow tires of grass. But I do like variety. And if I saw you eating cherries after I'd had months on bananas, I'd want some cherries. So I'd say the answer is yes, you can train every day, but you can't train the same thing in the same way every day.
I think many of us have experientially found that to be certainly true. The next question I have then comes in, and it's about recovering. We talked about, to elicit that training effect, we certainly have to recover from our athletic endeavors. What is the ideal recovery meal or protocol for eating to recover and establish that training effect?
Well, again, the ideal recovery is, the recovery meal is going to depend upon, people don't like it. I mean, I'm sorry when I say the answer depends, but the answer generally is it depends. If you just did a workout where it was 110 degrees outside and 95% humidity, and you just did a workout, I don't know, weightlifting or something, or playing basketball, you were just like drenched, dripping, you lose 8 pounds of water. Well, the ideal recovery meal is going to include a lot of water. It might have to be watermelon or blended watermelon with added water. Whereas if you were working out and it was 36 degrees outside and you were doing something that was required a fair amount of muscular endurance and took some muscular strength, and you were working pretty hard, but you were doing it for 2.5 hours, and there were bursts involved, and I mean it was that kind of hard work, but you never sweated a drop, and you get back on the scale after the workout and you're 1 pound lighter, and you go, wow, I didn't lose much water, but my goodness, I used so much sugar and so much electrolytes just in using that much muscular exertion. And you need to take in the sugars primarily. Yeah, you need a little bit of water, but there's going to be water in with your food. You might not even have to drink any water at all. The first go round, you might have had to drink a half a gallon of water before you start having watermelon, and in the second example, you might be able to just sit down to a meal of celery and bananas and be quite done. Um, I've done workouts. You know, some workouts really lend themselves to the empty stomach. Some workouts don't so much lend themselves to the empty stomach. Uh, I don't I don't want to have anything in my stomach when I'm doing cardio. Whereas if I'm going to do something that's pure strength training, I'm not really thrilled having a completely empty stomach. I'll do it on an empty stomach, and I can perform well on an empty stomach. But I'd rather have food in there. I don't like that same empty feeling that is so lovely when I'm doing cardio is something I don't want when I'm doing strength training. And so very often before strength training, I'll have my fruit meal before I go strength train. And when I come back after strength training, I might have a little bit of fruit, but I might just sit down and have my salad and be done right there. Um, I might have salad and some avocado or something a bit fatty, some sesame seeds or something, and say that was more than enough. So the ideal recovery meal really changes not only just based on um, the activity of choice, but the conditions in which that activity is performed and what you ate beforehand, or if you didn't eat anything at all beforehand and you're just going, nope, I came in empty. So in which case, if I do my weightlifting on an empty stomach and then come home, then I just want to eat all the fruit I can possibly eat until I'm sure I've had enough fruit, and then I'll have my salad. So the ideal recovery meal varies dramatically with your physical needs at the time. I mean, it could be, it's basically going to be water, sugar, and electrolytes, but you're going to have to choose the ratios based on the demands of the training.
Which, in an interesting way, kind of comes back onto the idea of the 6 facets of fitness as well. The components for fitness are still the same. The components for recovery are still the same. But depending on what you want, depending on what you're aiming for, you might have to pick and choose where you focus on,
No question.
nutritionally.
Exactly. Well said. And, the idea of 5 facets of fitness, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, neurological, and cardio, gives you the feeling that they're 5 completely unrelated to each other areas when they're really not. And even if they were, there aren't any activities that call for just one or just the other. They all require bits and pieces of each of the others. There is nothing that's pure strength, because even the strength requires some neurological component, and the strength requires some time, hence a very short but real endurance component. All of them require bits and pieces of the others. The reason I like the 6 facets as a method of teaching is so that we can see the interrelationships and get a better sense of the fact that nothing really stands alone in that regard. And people say, well, I'm a cardio athlete. I go, well, great, you're a cardio athlete. What is how much neurological skill is involved? I mean, I know Michael Arnstein went for a run last year. I think he's done it twice. I think he actually won the race the second time he did it. First time he admittedly was unprepared for the demands of the race. But once he'd done it and saw what was involved, he did much better the second time. But the race involved running across jungle floor that was, he never hit the ground for hours at a time. He would just be running across a floor of roots. And it was just endless roots. And I've done that kind of hiking in Hawaii where you never hit the ground and every step is uneven. It's like ankle breaking heaven. You know, I mean, it's like it's made for breaking ankles. It's made for falling down, catching your feet, and you know, if you don't have fantastic neurologic abilities, there's no way you're going to ever complete those hours of running through the jungle, through the nighttime, no less, and never putting your foot on the ground. It's just always on wood, always on slippery, wet roots. It was not a, I mean, I saw a video of it. It's not pretty. It's not something most people could do, let alone would do, let alone do it at winning pace. But it took tremendous neurologic ability to be able, because you don't run your running stride. You have to run according to where the ground lets you put your feet down. It was just a blessing, but you know, different types of abilities are needed, and so we look at that interaction of the 6 facets in order to show how that works, and still realize that even when it's 5 and they say, well, this includes everything. Well, it does, but it doesn't show how much one area blurs into the next.
I really appreciate your comprehensive model, Dr. Graham, and your concise way of expressing it. It's very useful for tailoring my athletic feats, and as you mentioned, Michael Arnstein or many other clients of yours have found success in using these techniques as well. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for providing questions and participating in the webinar structure. If you have any further questions, I highly encourage you to participate and contribute on the 801010 forum. You can find it on the 801010forum.com. And as mentioned, in just in a couple weeks now, Dr. Graham's premier health and fitness week or event, FitX Health Week, will be happening September 26th through October 3rd. It is a fantastic place to establish your fitness if you haven't established it already, to take it to a new level if you already are well established in your fitness and just want to see how high you can take your fitness level, what you can really get out of your own potential is really what's given to you at FitX Health Week. As mentioned, it's open for beginners to, you'll see people that are just starting to get fit to people who are going for the Olympics in 2016. It's completely personalized training in small groups to meet your needs, 100% organic fruits and vegetables served at every meal, bread and breakfast style accommodations, 2 lectures every day, 1 on nutrition, 1 on fitness, a very supportive environment to help you on your fitness journey as you go into the future. It's just a completely comprehensive program for anyone who wants to get serious about their fitness. So I encourage you to check it out. The page you'll see after this webinar will be that page that you can register on, and I look forward to seeing you there. Dr. Graham, thank you very much. As I said, thank you for presenting today. If you'd like to give your word of departure, take care, everyone.
Well, sure. I mean, once again, I'll encourage people who listen to this webinar live, or the people who sign up for it later, please send us your questions as well. We welcome you to come to the forum and have questions answered there, start new threads, or engage in the hundreds of threads that already exist. But also, if you have questions related to this webinar and want us to answer them, I mean, if I get enough questions, I'll certainly create an addendum. We'll do a question and answer session. This happened with our event on children. So enough questions were asked afterwards. We just came back and did a whole session of just questions and answers. I'd be thrilled to do such a thing for the fitness event as well. Hopefully we will hear more questions, and so don't hesitate to write them into us. We want to hear from you, and you're our reason for being here. So do come, do participate, do get your questions answered. You know, A lot of people think they have silly questions, but you're silly if you don't ask the questions, and you're silly for a lifetime if you don't ask the questions. You might seem silly for a moment to you or to somebody else if you do ask the question, but you'll be wise for a lifetime once you have the answer. So I encourage you to get your questions answered. I'm telling you folks, if you're even having a glimmer of thought about Health and Fitness Week, please come to our FitX Week. It's just the nuts. Comes with a money back guarantee. You can come out there and tell us you didn't like it, we'll still give you your money back. So we've never had that happen ever in 20 years because we definitely deliver a lot more than we possibly could tell you about here. I look forward to seeing you guys succeed in your various ventures. Hopefully you'll succeed beyond your wildest dreams. Remind all of you to go to health. This is Dr. Doug Graham wishing you all the very, very best. I appreciate your support. Look forward to seeing you at our next event.